Hi, everybody. Welcome to It's Not Your Money, real talk about achieving racial equity in philanthropy. It's a bit of a mouthful. These slightly irreverent but frank conversations feature leaders challenging the status quo plaguing philanthropy today and those who are demonstrating how we can collectively build a more equitable and just funding landscape, particularly for Black, Indigenous, other people of colour, women and non-binary founders. I'm Jasmine Shams-Lau, funder in residence at the Capital Collaborative by Camelback Ventures, and your host today. And I am so thrilled to be joined by Stephanie Brobbey, founder and CEO of Good Ancestor Movement. Stephanie, welcome. Please tell us a bit about yourself and the Good Ancestor Movement.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to be here, and I feel like this is going to be a fun one.
Oh, yes.
I am Stephanie. I always say I am Stephanie because my name means crowned with victory. So if I say I am Stephanie, it's like saying I am crowned with victory. And I love doing that. And I'm from London, England. My parents came over to the UK in the 1980s from Ghana. So I'm the proud daughter of Ghanaian immigrants. And I'm a recovering lawyer, having practiced for 10 years, and currently the CEO and the founder of the Good Ancestor Movement, which launched in September 2021. So that's me.
Amazing. Well, we are going to talk all about Good Ancestor Movement in just a moment, but got to hit you with this question first. Our regular listeners know that one of the reasons that this interview series is called It's Not Your Money is because when we incorrectly label money in foundation endowments and donor advised funds as still belonging to founders, then we also act like the money and the foundation still belong to them. And that perpetuates the concentration of power, and words are influential in terms of who holds power. So with all of that said, my question for you, Stephanie, as with all of our interviewees, is what shift in language do you think we need to make that might help diversify power?
I think this is an interesting question because in my experience, I think I can't think of, a magic word or, a particular sentence that, we should talk about to shift the way that we're talking and thinking about power. But really, in my experience, has been to make explicit the things that are implicit across our verbal language, our body language, describe what's happening in plain English and talk about the power dynamics quite explicitly, instead of kind of glossing over things quite briefly. And I think that we tend to want to. My experience has shown me that shifting power is often harder than shifting money. And yes. I think that we want to, well, a lot of us, like in the philanthropic sector, we want to approach it as like a tick box exercise, culturally speaking. That's, of course, that's not our aim. That's not what we really want to do. But that kind of, that ends up being, are we shifting power? We like, let's do these 10 things to indicate that we're shifting power. Well, actually, it has to be an embodied response, and an embodied practice. And it's not a one-time thing. I don't think there are any silver bullets. I think it's about being very intentional in the way that we acknowledge verbally, somatically, where the power dynamics lie in the context of philanthropic practice.
What I really love about what you just said, Stephanie, is this is such a problem in our world of philanthropy. And I know your work overlaps with philanthropy, but it's a much broader set of industries and stakeholders that you're working with, but particularly in philanthropy, there is so much that is unsaid, that is assumed, that is the unwritten rule book, that is, you know, the keys, the tips for how you actually raise money if you're a fundraiser, or the way that you keep your job as a foundation staff member. Like there is so much that we don't speak out loud, even down to the way that policies and laws govern how money does and does not flow, how foundations are constructed, how they are and are not allowed to act. There is such a dearth of information said out loud. So it just feels really, really applicable, particularly in philanthropy. Oh.
Yeah, I think we need to use our words, and we need to name what feels unnameable, you know, and just to have those conversations, because otherwise it perpetuates this very toxic dynamic.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Well, you are no stranger to difficult conversations, naming what has not been named. And so in preparing for this conversation, I was really enjoying myself digging around on your website. And your website describes Good Ancestor Movement's work as disrupting the private wealth industry. Oh boy, that is a lot of big words. Disrupting private wealth. What does that mean to you, to the organization, and how do you go about doing it?
I mean, I'll answer that question by providing a bit of context on the private wealth industry, which,
Brilliant.
as some people will know, but not everyone will know, that the private wealth industry is this sector, this part of the economy, this system, right, within our global systems of economy and governance, that is kind of exclusively designed to perpetuate wealth concentration and wealth accumulation.
Right.
It is designed to cater for the needs of wealthy individuals and families, but also other custodians of capital, like foundations, philanthropic foundations. And the mental model within that industry is really, you know, it really functions on two main assumptions. The first is that everyone wants to and should accumulate as much wealth as possible. You know, there's almost no conception of excessive or extreme wealth, which is a term that we're collectively, the folks in the ecosystem that I'm working in, we're really trying to socialize this term, extreme wealth, to really name it for what it is. But there's not really it's not really a concept within the industry itself. So that's the first main assumption. The second assumption is that everybody wants to minimize as much tax as possible. You know, there are large, there's a large proportion of the industry that is dedicated really to minimizing the tax bills, tax contributions of some of the wealthiest people in the world. That's often coded in, you know, optimizing or being efficient or mitigating. But it's really, you know, an advisory system that is deliberately depriving governments around the world of their ability to raise the correct amount of revenue. And so this was, you know, I practiced for 10 years. And I really enjoyed my job. I loved working with clients. I loved trying to, you know, support them through kind of often challenging decision making, break down complexity for them. But I became really politicized around what I was doing because of, you know, the tax minimization and recognizing that, you know, my work, my industry was really contributing towards quite large scale inequality. And so the Good Ancestor movement is really, when we talk about disrupting the private wealth industry, we are trying to shift consciousness completely and to create a model of wealth stewardship, which is fundamentally centering redistribution, which is centering the needs of society and community and the planet. And in doing so, kind of creating this a sense of a need to restore balance, you know, in the in conversations around wealth and wealth stewardship. And so it's really about disrupting practice and how, you know, some of the practices around wealth and tax and investments and how much people have, and how are they showing up in their you know, in their taxes, and ultimately trying to help people to interrogate how they're participating in the economy, not just how they're redistributing their wealth. And so it's really disrupting, I guess, you know, intergenerational patterns of thinking about wealth and where it comes from, and how it should be managed.
I don't know how folks who are listening are feeling right now, but hearing you describe all of that, Stephanie, and when I first learned about your organization, it just fills me with so much hope that this exists, that this is your mission, that this is what you're doing. I think my guess is there aren't too many people working on this clear of a mission in the direction of centering redistribution of wealth and really taking on that massive mindset shift, the generational, the societal mindset expectations that there is no such thing as excessive wealth, that we should be always trying to minimize taxes. Are you out on a limb there? You know, is it just Good Ancestor Movement? Are there others who are doing this with you?
I imagine there are folks out there doing this at you know, at a micro level, maybe, you know, in an individual practice, and that they have built trust with, you know, maybe individuals and families, and they operate within, you know, within some of the breadth of the assumptions that I was talking about, that, you know, they're flipping them somewhat, but not at the scale of, you know, and in the type of formation that we are. But we very much hope there will be more people and organizations emerging. And actually, one of the things we're trying to do is to really support advisors in the industry who are interested in supporting more progressive approaches to wealth stewardship and equipping their clients accordingly.
Amazing. Okay. So that might potentially be one of the reasons that people get in touch with you, is if that is of interest and that is their role and area of influence in life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so you mentioned in describing what you're doing and this disruptive, the disruption of the private wealth industry, that you take what you termed a reparative approach. So I have done quite a lot of work with very, very, very wealthy people. And I'm not quite sure how I would have those conversations with people, if I'm completely frank. Like, I would be very excited to be part of them, but I think I would be very, very nervous. I wouldn't quite know where to start, and would be a little bit concerned about their reaction and how they might receive the idea of reparations or a reparative approach directly connected to what they are seeing as personal wealth. So can you tell us a bit about what it is like trying to support wealthy folks, not only identifying how the wealth accumulation and concentration has caused harm, but then also helping them move to a place of a reparative perspective?
Yeah, this is one of the most challenging aspects of our work. I think the first thing I should say is that at the Good Ancestor Movement, you know, I have an amazing team, and one of our core values is really centering collective care. And so we approach this need to look at reparative approaches to wealth stewardship and redistribution really through that lens of, you know, starting with collective care and a recognition that all of us have been traumatized by the dominant economic system that we have
Right.
inherited over generations.
Mm-hmm.
All of us have been traumatized by racism and white supremacy. And wealth, wealth inequality, and having wealth, whether it's, particularly when it's inherited, I think, and having social justice values can be really traumatic, and there's trauma on both sides of, whether you have wealth or you haven't had wealth. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done around kind of cross-class organizing, which is effectively, what we're trying to do. One of the foundational pieces of work we need to do is to recognize that, inequality and extreme wealth has traumatized all of us. And so from that starting point, recognizing that there's a lot of care needed in how we approach this. And I know that some people will disagree with that and just be completely cerebral and intellectual. It's not your money, give it back, period. And we see, the need to really approach this from an intellectual perspective, but also in a sense of, from a perspective of healing the soul and the spirit, right? And ultimately healing relationship, which is what this work is all about. Healing our relationship to ourselves, to each other and the planet. And so we take an approach which is very much grounded in empathy and compassion. One of the kind of first points of engagement that wealth holders have with the Good Ancestor movement is to participate in our program, Reimagining Wealth, which is a kind of cohort-based learning program. We call it a crash course in political economy for wealth holders. And really it helps people to, what we do is we retell the story of our economy. You can tell the story of our economy here in the West or in the global North. This is Kehinde Andrews I'm quoting, and he wrote The New Age of Empire. He says, you can either say, that the West became great because of the 3 revolutions of science and politics and revolution, or you can talk about transatlantic slavery and, colonialism and, genocide and ecocide. And so we really focus on that educational element and shifting consciousness around the economy and understanding, providing a framework and a lens through which wealth holders can understand like how their wealth is situated. And a lot of that involves looking at reparations and, the case for reparations and what has happened, and some of the intergenerational injustices which are have still, have been left unhealed and unresolved.
Right.
So there is that educational perspective, but there's also, we have kind of therapeutic support in our programs. So we, folks have access to a team of psychologists who they can engage with, not for therapy, but to have a clinically informed space so that they can hold some of the stuff that comes up. And I suppose we try and approach it collectively, as through the program, and so that we can create a container for mutual support. So yeah, those are some of the ways in which we approach kind of supporting people to understand what does repair mean, and what does it mean to repair the legacies of harm that we have inherited collectively, but also unpack where there might be kind of a direct link with their wealth, to a situation which needs repair. And that is I have found in my own practice has been kind of a very slow and gradual process that involves building trusting relationship and practicing collective care.
What strikes me about the approach that you're taking is how you're demonstrating a rejection of what got us here in the first place. And really, you know, this term collective care, it really epitomizes the opposite of extractive, individualistic, you know, norms that nobody sets out to say, I'm going to be extractive, I'm going to be an individualist. But they're socialized into us, right? They're rewarded in the society that we live in. And I just love that the part of the way that you are introducing that education is by demonstrating it as well, in the way that you're holding space for people. There's something very poetic about that.
Yeah, I mean, we try to really, you know, situate everything in practice at Good Ancestor Movement. We recognize that we're, you know, even organizationally and as a community, I like to refer to us as, because, you know, we've become kind of like a political home for, you know, a number of wealth holders in a sense, without intending to. But to recognize that we are a microcosm of the world and the systems that are at play all the time. And that, you know, the work of unlearning those behaviors, you know, within the system, and recognizing that we need to be very intentional about our practices if we are to be in right relationship with each other. And that's, you know, that's the work that underpins the work, you know, and it's so critical that we all engage in that. But it does mean slowing down, which I think people struggle with, because, you know, in our dominant culture, particularly up here in the global north, where, you know, it's very much results driven, you know, smashing our way through, getting the data. And, you know, of course, we want to maintain momentum, but we can only move at the speed of right relationship, and that can take some time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that slowing down, as you said, it doesn't only just require patience, but it requires building our tolerance and comfort with the messiness of ourselves, of what it really means to be in relationship with somebody, not just to agree on a way to move forward, and to accept and fully name all of the complexities that come along with being a messy human. Oh, yay. So a lot of the people who watch our interviews are typically foundation leaders, foundation staff, who are, you know, either they're looking for advice, they're looking for hope, they're just interested in whatever the subject matter is. And I know that Good Ancestor Movement works with a whole plethora of different types of clients, but part of that range includes trustees, foundations, and folks in the philanthropy realm. So if you're thinking about, you know, those foundation staff and leaders who are listening now, do you have any advice or encouragement about how they might be able to just plant seeds to be able to have conversations with their trustees, with the original wealth holders, or not the original wealth holders, excuse me, but the founders of whatever the trust or the foundation is? How might they be able to just take a tiny piece of this and introduce some breadcrumbs to their trustees, to their board, about the ideas of reparative distribution, about the ideas of rethinking their ownership of wealth?
Yeah, I mean, I think we did some work as an organization with an amazing reparationist, international reparationist, jurisconsult called Esther Stanford Zoze, who has just been doing some incredible work in reparations movements for over 20 years. And so we went on a learning journey with her. And one of the things that she left us with was that education is the preparation for reparations. And there's so much that people don't know. There's so much we don't know about reparations. There's so much that's misunderstood.
Yeah.
About what reparations actually are. And I think, again, with people wanting to tick boxes and say, oh, you know, we've considered reparations and a reparative approach, actually the learning that needs to be done doesn't, you know, isn't undertaken. And so really taking time to read about reparations, about colonial legacies, and to understand, you know, what has happened to, you know, peoples of the African continent, the African diaspora, the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. I did a learning cohort with 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples, who are based in California, and just learning about Indigenous struggle and the genocide of the Indigenous peoples and the resistance and what they are calling for now. And similarly with you know, reparations for African peoples. You know, one of the big learning points for me was learning about, you know, the need for self-repair and self-determination, and that reparations are beyond just financial compensation. You know, that's not to say, you know, financial compensation isn't important, but it's so much more. And I think people need to really invest in learning about the richness and the layers and the complexity of what we mean by reparations and reparative approach. And, you know, and I said we just now, but there are multiple we's, right? So that's something that I would offer. But then also understanding that this work, we have to move beyond the intellectual. We have to find a way to create space to do this work in our bodies, right? One of my remote teachers, I suppose I would say, but someone who I'm immensely grateful for his work is Resmaa Menakem and his foundations in somatic abolitionism, and the you know, there's not just Resmaa Menakem, there's a multiplicity of practitioners out there who are doing similar work, but, you know, he's someone that I have learned from. But really understanding that, you know, we've all been traumatized by this, and we all need to address that trauma, because the intellectual can only take us so far. We have to get back into our bodies, right? And to process what's going on. You know, is that defensiveness about reparations because of something that I have read intellectually, or is it my body remembering something, right? And coming up. And also something that he says is that, you know, you're trying to process something individually that was always meant to be addressed collectively. And so creating those spaces for collective healing, because the burden of trying to produce culture that is that reflects an embodied anti-racist practice is such a big burden that we have to do that collectively as well. So you know, those would be my offerings, and I think they probably sound quite daunting, but you know, you can find multiple openings within some of the offerings that I've suggested.
Right, absolutely. And really all one can do is take it one step at a time as well. You know, start with one article, start with one book, start with, you know, one conversation, and see where that leads. Like, you're not going to absorb the collective history all at once.
And I think you know, another thing is, you know, moving at the speed of relationship. Find the voices who are talking about reparations, the people in communities that are trying to enact self-repair, who may be grantees, who may not be grantees yet, and seek them out and understand, like, what does it mean to be learning from folks like that in ways that are non-extractive, in ways that build relationship and build power on their part. I think that's really important.
I think that last piece that you mentioned about what does it mean to be in relationship without being extractive is a really interesting entry point for people in the foundation world. And, you know, the majority of our audience is US based as well. And in US based philanthropy, like there really is a habit of being very extractive around knowledge and data and research. It kind of just strikes me in this conversation that could be a really interesting entry point for program officers, for executive directors, for, you know, strategic directors to really think about, you know, having conversations as a team, having conversations with your board in some way, shape, or form to say, what does it look like for us to gather this information in a way where everybody is valued? Whether that is, you know, or probably is monetarily, and also, you know, as human beings showing up as well. What does it look like for us to, you know, collect data from our grantees, from the community, in a way that really values them economically, but also socially as well? What are we doing right now that we can change, that we can't change? What can we work towards? But just questioning this idea of what do we take from those that we work with that we're not currently demonstrating that, you know, in a tangible way that we value what they're providing.
Right. And how do we remain transparent and accountable to them about where we're at? Because I think,
Yeah.
you know, again, with the desire to be appearing to be doing the right thing,
Yeah.
we, you know, we can be giving mixed signals, and, you know, let's make it okay to be transparent about the fact that we, you know, are on a learning journey, and this is news to us about, you know, maybe doing some somatic work to, you know, go deeper with understanding the need for repair. And I think, you know, I know a lot of folks working in foundations will maybe, you know, this will be really challenging for them. So how can they support each other collectively to kind of you know, advocate for this internally without kind of burning out?
Yes.
Yeah.
Not something we have quite figured out in the philanthropy world is how to support each other collectively as the foundation workforce. But something I think about quite a lot. So we are coming to the end of our time together, and I actually want to mix up our last question, Stephanie, and I would just love to hear from you. Like, this work is so bloody hard, right? You have not picked an easy road.
Yeah.
And what is it? How would you describe what it is that keeps you in this work? How would you describe what it is that motivates and fuels your tank of hope and inspiration?
Oh, wow, what a question on of all days. I have always had a very strong sense of kind of pursuing my purpose and recognizing that, you know, I believe that we're all here with a unique offering to the world and to its people. And so I really believe that for this time, you know, I'm meant to be doing this work. I'm meant to be being that bridge between the world of private capital and social justice. And I feel utterly convinced by that every day. And so that's a no-brainer. But when it's, you know, the day-to-day, you're in it, you're under it, it's rough. There's so many challenges and disappointments and you know, so much to be learned. It's the people, it's the relationships that I have, the relationships that I'm accountable to, folks that are organizing in communities, in social movements, doing, you know, frankly, it's sacred work.
Mm.
And then it's fellow comrades in the work, you know, who are finding different ways to liberate capital and to support one another. Right now, I'm just coming to an end of being in the Just Economy Institute fellowship, cohort 7, and yeah, there's just some incredible people that are all working to use capital, mobilize capital in service of a just economy. And you know, it is an utter privilege to be in community with so many incredible people that are, you know, learning together, we're making mistakes together, we're healing together. And you know, ultimately, and I think you'll have gathered this from what I've been talking about, but you know, one of the biggest learnings for me over the past 12 months has been recognizing that this isn't just about the work of bringing about a regenerative economy, like in practical terms, and it's really about a new way of being in the world, and a commitment. It demands a commitment to personal transformation, and that is so hard. It's so hard to meet yourself in this work every day, and I think that's what, you know, a lot of people aren't actually prepared to do. And I get that, because it's really, really tough, but being able to do it with just an amazing crowd of witnesses who are also in the work and really committed to being in the work together and seeing each other thrive and seeing each other's healing is just so special. And I feel deeply, deeply privileged and blessed.
Speaking of privileged, thank you so much, so much for being here today, Stephanie. I feel very lucky that we've been able to have you come and be part of, introduce your conversation to us. Yeah, deep gratitude. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Viewers, I wholeheartedly invite you to check out Stephanie and team's work at goodancestormovement.com. We'll put that link in the chat for you. You can find a little bit more about the Good Ancestor movement, learn more about their approach and everything that Stephanie has talked about. And there's an option there if you want to get in contact. And it seems like there's some overlap there in terms of what you're trying to do and what Stephanie and her team are doing. Please do get in touch with them. They are extraordinary, extraordinary people. And of course, please do check out Camelback Ventures. We are launching a program soon, very, very soon, called Metamorphic Legacy, a new bespoke leadership experience for foundation trustees, high net worth individuals, people to come together to redesign governance in philanthropy. You can find out more at camelbackventures.org, and we would love to see you there. That is everything we have time for today. Big thank you to Stephanie, and thanks to everybody here for tuning in and listening.